Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Career Chat. I'm Krista Harmon, a workforce development consultant with the Kent ISD, and I'm very happy to have Stephanie Ward with us today. She's a manager of airport planning. Welcome, Stephanie.
Good afternoon.
So here on Career Chat, Stephanie, we love to take our role models back to when they were 16 or 17 and find out what you were thinking. Did you think you'd grow up to be a manager of airport planning?
No, I was on a completely different track. I thought I would be in a fighter jet.
I love that. So you had obviously loved planes at that point already.
I did. I really liked aviation. Ultimately wanted to be an astronaut, and that's kind of where my path was leading me with getting a private pilot's license. And somebody never asked me though how I did with G forces. Do you like riding roller coasters? Nobody ever asked me that, which is a very critical question to that whole career path.
Yeah, that's what a great piece of wisdom already that young people are getting. How do we test that? Yes, going to roller coasters and checking that kind of physical, because we don't know what we don't know. So here you want to be in aviation, um, then you got into a plane. So tell us about that turning point for you then.
Yeah, well, I got my private pilot's license, and that's a whole different level of G-force. So loved
Hmm.
doing that, loved flying, got that before I graduated high school. So
Wow.
that was a lot of fun. Not too many kids can, say that.
No, that's
Um,
amazing.
then
Well,
went off.
and I do want to dig into that because
Sure, yeah.
young people might want to know, how did you do that? So let's talk about that for a second.
Sure. Well, I got interested even before I could drive. So my dad's requirement was you have to be able to drive yourself to your flight lessons. So it wasn't until I turned 16 that I could go do that. So, did a lot of odd jobs, a lot of things, begged, borrowed, steal money, whatever it took to pay for those flight hours. So managed to get that over the course of 2 summers. And really enjoyed that. That was a huge step in the right direction. Was headed for the Air Force Academy, but decided that was a big step for a little kid from the thumb of Michigan. I wasn't quite ready for that, so settled on an ROTC scholarship with the Air Force at Michigan State University. And then that's when I found out that G forces were much, much greater than I really liked to endure. And then also my eyesight, as you can see, the glasses. I was not going to get commissioned to be a pilot. I could be a navigator. So decided that was kind of the wrong seat. So I went out and started investigating new career paths. And so went and did a career aptitude test at Michigan State University. And urban planning kept coming up as a career path. And I thought, well, I've never heard of such thing, but let's go find out. So luckily, MSU has a very well-renowned urban planning degree program. So I went over there and said, hey, this seems like a pretty good fit. I like it. So uh, flash forward 4 years, I graduate with a urban planning degree. Figure I'm never going to deal with airports other than recreational flying. And 3 months before I graduated, I actually had a local firm who put an ad out called the dean of the urban planning department and said, hey, we're looking for an airport planner. We'll train them. We just need somebody who's got planning somewhere in their background. And 34 years later, I'm still here. I'm still in the Lansing area, still doing what I do. So strange twist of fate.
I love that. And I think that's important for young people to hear, that sometimes things happen that we're not even planning. So we are definitely going to dig
Completely.
into that. But I want to get back just a few more details that young people I know want
Sure.
to know. Tell us about the eyesight thing. I don't know if we know some of those requirements.
Sure. So with the Air Force anyway, you had to have a fully uncorrected 20/20 vision. And I did not have that. I had an astigmatism that affected my sight. Um, my eyesight could have went bad the day after I was commissioned, but because it was bad beforehand, they wouldn't commission me as a pilot. So pretty critical, important piece of the equation to find out ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that today, because I did not know that myself.
Yep.
And then just one more piece of information about you as a young person. Were you good in science and math? Was that something that naturally came to you? Tell us about some of that academic side of your life.
Sure, sure. It was, or I thought it was. High school was great. Graduated just shy of a 4.0. really enjoyed science and math. Got to Michigan State though, and let me tell you, high school or college calculus is a whole different animal. I was not ready for that, and so I did a little reevaluation and decided maybe I wasn't quite as mathy as I wanted to be. Now, having said that, flash forward 30 years, I am still often at the table with our engineers brainstorming solutions. So, those tendencies are still there. Just, the engineering degree isn't behind my name anymore.
Yeah, and I think I love that you normalize that too, Stephanie, that sometimes something that in high school can be very different in college. And
Absolutely.
and it sometimes will rock our worlds a little bit, but that's okay because it doesn't mean the end of the road for sure.
No.
So you kept taking these career tests, and I guess I want to point that out too for young people that there are helpers out there to help us do this work, some computer programs, but you obviously sought that help. And urban planning kept popping up. So for you, that interest was there and you decided, hey, let's go for that. Do you remember reading the college catalog to look at some of the classes to kind of double check it? Or how did you kind of research a little bit to know you want to make that jump?
Yeah, great question. Well, the engineering side, because I was an electrical engineering major on the Air Force side, which I was going down that road because that was what the Air Force was going to want. So as soon as that came off the table, I was like, oh, I have this whole new world. So yeah, the course catalog was a huge thing. I went in and I met with the dean of the program and said, talk to me about this. It's coming up in my, when I do the career summaries, what's a normal day look like? And of course, with just about any career, it varies. But there was a lot of community outreach. There was analytical thinking, so a lot of those skills that I, craved as on the engineering side were still going to be applicable. And then MSU, as an example, does require a internship. So that was great. I expected by the time we're done for, if any of your um, audience is familiar with, have seen the show Parks and Rec. So I thought I was going to be Leslie Knope. I thought I was going to be a Parks and Rec director, community planner, go run something for a county or a city. So that's where I thought that path was going to take me. And that sounded like a decent path. I worked for 2 summers for the St. Clair County Planning Department, doing intern stuff with them. So that was fun and I enjoyed it. So thought that was going to be a good career path, and had no idea that 3 months before graduating, I was going to get a curveball.
Yes. So young people, pay attention. She did internships. She was actively experiencing things. There were no big red flags. She was heading down her major, but then she got that call that they needed an airport planner. So give us the elevator pitch of what an airport planner is. That's a new term for a lot of us.
Sure. Well, if you fly at all, when you come in and the pilots are the ones that get all the glory. I usually say they're the guys and girls flying the airplanes. You're familiar with your flight attendants. If you look out the window, you see what we call the marshalers. The folks with the orange batons. That's all what gets the airplane in and out of the air and to the terminal building. But there's so much more. So what I do on a daily basis is my team and I were the ones responsible for figuring out what happens on the airfield and the terminal building. Where do things go geospatially? How do they get designed? What are they trying to accommodate? So my day can be 180 degrees or even 360 degrees different any single day, depending upon what client we're working with and what they're looking to do. But pretty much if it happens on an airport, it's been fun in my career. I've been able to touch it in some way. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah, young people might not know what that word geospatially means. Help us understand that.
Sure, just where it is relative to everything else in space. So if you think about if you've ever flown on an airplane, what's the length of the runway? What's the width of the runway? How does the aircraft taxi from the runway on different pavements to get to the terminal building where you get off the airplane? What do the boarding bridges that you walk down to get to the terminal building? How much space do we put at the gate area where you come into the terminal building? How much curb front is out at the front of the terminal building when you come in to offload and load your bags? How big is the parking deck? So all those things have to fit together and combine to make a whole system that makes the whole thing work.
I'm always fascinated when I fly in. I was just in San Diego and you're flying right into neighborhoods. It's like, how did this even get designed? It's fascinating to me.
Yep.
And
Yep.
they're building a whole new airport pieces
Yep.
there. So you're based in Lansing. Do you fly a lot to get to clients? Because I imagine you're not just working on a Lansing or Grand Rapids airport. Tell us about your client work or how your typical day might be.
Sure. Well, when I first started, and when I mentioned when I got out of school, the company that hired me literally only did work in the state of Michigan. So I worked almost exclusively in the state of Michigan for my first 8 years of my career. The current company that I work for now, called Mead and Hunt, we are a national firm, and so I work coast to coast. And one day, like right now, for example, I am working in Columbia, South Carolina, working on an airport master plan there for that airport, determining how do we expand their facility. I'm working on a national research study that's based out of Washington, D.C. I'm working in the state of Hawaii, working on a general aviation system plan where we're looking at the impacts of helicopter operations. So it goes coast to coast. It can be any individual niche. And quite honestly, in this career path, you can make it just about anything you want. I do know other planners who are very localized in what they do. You could, for example, become an airport planner for just a single airport. A lot of the larger hub airports, we call them, the Detroit Metros, the Denvers, the Chicagos, they have planners literally on staff, and all they do is that airport. And then you have folks like myself who, go coast to coast or regionally to support airport development. So it can really be any size you want.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, this is all new information. That 4-year degree that you got in urban planning, then a lot of what took place after that was on the job training. Did you end up having to get other certifications or end up getting a master's degree, or was it on the job? Help young people understand how you gain the knowledge you have today.
Sure. For me, it was all on the job. So, it helped with my pilot background that I already knew some of the airport stuff. Certainly not all of it. I knew how to fly a plane, which is a piece of the equation. But a lot of it has been on the job. So I actually manage a staff of 11. A number of those staff members are actually not other planners. I hire folks who are interested in aviation. Because that's a big part of what we're trying to do as planners. Is I'll use the term selling. We're trying to convince community members that this makes sense. Why would you want to do this? And so you have to have some passion for that to really sell it, right? Think about when you're asking for extra money from your folks, right? You got to believe it to really make them understand that you really want that. So I actually have half of my staff are graduates from Western Michigan University's Airport Operations and Maintenance program. So I know that they've got an interest and passion in aviation, and then I teach them how to be planners. So they come to the table with a lot of the aviation knowledge in terms of acronyms and basic flight principles and things like that. But then we teach them how to put it all together. So you can actually come into the program or come into being an airport planner with relatively little background, quite honestly, or a varied background. I have a staff member whose background is chemistry, but he's evolved through other job careers to now lead our economic development aspects, which is, how much is an airport really worth? I've got another guy who his whole background is in environmental focus. And so he applies that because all of our projects have to meet proper environmental review. So he applies that all relative to the airport side of the house. So there's lots of individual niches. We talk about it that, aviation as a whole is like a little city. And so pretty much any career that you can think of out in the normal environment, if you will, you can do it with an aviation twist and bring it to aviation if you have interest in aviation. For example, I've had conversations with folks of, well, I really like numbers and math. I think I want to be an accountant, but I like airports. Well, guess what? Every airport has got an airport accountant. Well, I really like social media and marketing. Well, most of the larger airports, or even like us as a consulting firm, we have marketing people who help us with that kind of thing that has the aviation twist to it. So, I like to tell them, if you've got an interest in airplanes and an interest in anything else, you can more than likely combine them and end up with a career path.
What an encouragement to young people that like planes and like aviation, and then maybe those G-forces affect them too. What an encouragement that there's so many ways that they can do that, right? That's so
Absolutely.
exciting. Yeah. So what is your favorite part and your least favorite, and then we're gonna have you show some slides of your project. But what's your favorite part of your job and your least favorite?
Oh my gosh. I think the favorite is just the fact that I get to see results of what I do. For example, with my career here in the state of Michigan, I can drive around anywhere in the state of Michigan, and there's about, I think I counted them once, close to 60 airports that I can drive around and I can say, I helped build that. I was a part of that. I got that approved. It's a total, geek out kind of moment where you go, I helped make that happen. That, you don't necessarily get in other jobs. Least favorite, gosh, it's probably just the time some things take. A lot of what I do is funded by the federal government. So, we get a lot of grants that come through the Federal Aviation Administration or the FAA, and just that process can be very, very slow. So, there can be something that I work with a community that we develop, and it may be 5, 6 years or better before we can see it actually manifest itself. So sometimes you gotta have some patience. So that's probably the only downside that I have, that we can make some great decisions, make some really good progress locally, and then we have to sit and wait for the funding to come in to make things happen. So that can be a little frustrating, but eventually it makes its way to where it needs to go, and then you get to see it built.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. For young people, that's called a tangible result of your work. You can see it.
Absolutely.
So pay attention to that. As you pull up your slides, Stephanie, I'd like to ask you a question as you're doing that.
Sure.
Sometimes one of the perks of being in aviation is you get to get free travel or travel discounts. Does that apply to you in any way, shape, or form?
I wish it did. Very little. One of the things that's fun for me is that I corporately we get to travel a lot outside of the airlines. And so we used to have a corporate aircraft that we could fly on, but now we just what we do is called charter. So you contract with a separate plane, and then we can go destination to destination instead of being in the system, as we call it, with the commercial airlines. So that's kind of fun.
That is a nice perk. That
Yep.
is a nice perk. All right, over these next 3 to 4 minutes, let's see some of your projects. Because again, bringing this to life, I mean,
Sure.
we all
So
just
this is
see airports. We don't really see the work behind it.
Sure. So this is just a quick look, of where do I work. So I have clients that are airports and what we call commercial service. That's where you have your major airlines at. General aviation airports, that's probably a small airport, local community that you might be familiar with, where we have what we call private pilots. We also do work at military airports, and then we do work for both states as well as the federal government and well as industry groups. So we get to touch a lot of different levels. And then, we're in communities of all shapes and sizes. We're in the major metropolitan, we do work at O'Hare Airport down in Chicago, all the way up to some, remote airports in Alaska. So it's a lot of fun that we've got a dynamic group. And this is just a brief summary of the different things that we do. So it's everything from developing a master plan for an individual airport, which is looking at how do they build out, to doing, as I mentioned, national research. NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. And so that's doing environmental compliance related things relative to airports. We do site plans. So where should we put a new airport? You wouldn't think many of them get built. And it's not necessarily that they don't get built. It's usually we're proving a negative, that we can't go out and find a new spot to build an airport. So that's why we have to develop at the existing one. So there's a lot of different projects that we can do that, again, I enjoy because I don't usually do the same thing 2 days in a row. We do a lot of economic impact analysis. And so that's where we're looking at what's the impact of having an airport in your community. And Christy, you mentioned San Diego, which is in the middle. One of our staff has a cool story to tell on that. He did an economic impact study looking at San Diego Airport because they're so land constrained, which you mentioned. They had to look at what flights make the most sense for them to take because they can only have so many. So is it taking a flight from San Diego, say, to Chicago, or is it taking that same amount of time that an airplane is going to be there and flying all the way across the Pacific to Japan? You can imagine the economic benefit was go to Japan. It's going to make a lot more money and be more cost effective. So really cool ways to look at how is an airport worth. We also look at intangible things. You can see medical flights, drone operations, training. We look at all the types of things of what do those things bring to a community, and what's the benefit of those. And some of them you can't actually put a dollar amount on. You know, it's a matter of, it's a qualitative ability to have it. This next slide gives you an idea of, we look at development. So this is, it might be a little hard to read if you don't know what you're looking at, but this is Kalamazoo, Battle Creek Airport down in Kalamazoo. And we're looking at a runway extension down there to try to allow the aircraft to get out more safely. During winter operations is the big thing. In the wintertime, their runway is a little short when it's contaminated with snow. And so we're looking at how do we extend it. And one of the big things that we have there is we've got a railroad to relocate and land acquisition. So we have to buy property. So takes a lot of skills to talk to local property owners and negotiate that. We do land acquisition. So this is a graphic from Traverse City up at Cherry Capital Airport. We had to, every little color code that you see on the left-hand side of the slide, that represents a tree that was an obstruction to their approach surface. So what I had to do is go in and negotiate buying the air rights over all of those properties, over 60 of them, and then negotiating removing the trees from those parcels.
Wow.
So something that goes, you wouldn't normally associate with airport planning, right? But we're talking about both the physical area on the airport, but then all the airspace that leads into and out of the airports we have to keep clear. And then our statewide stuff, this is a sample from Michigan. We did what's called a system plan. So we're looking at all the airports across the state and how do they fit together. So fun fact, you can amaze your friends, Michigan has 226 public use airports, which is a lot. 96 of those get federal money. And so one of the things that we did in the study was we were looking at how much of a service area do each of those airports provide to their local community. So those are a lot of fun. I like working on those projects because you get exposed to the entire system of the state.
Because if I could interrupt there just for
Sure,
a second, because that
Sure.
impacts like Aeromed or the emergency systems,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah, I just want to point that out.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yep, and it puts you to access. We have a saying in the industry that a mile of highway will take you a mile, and a mile of runway will take you anywhere. Because most aircraft can operate on a mile of runway, so 5,280 feet, and can get you pretty much anywhere. And so we talk about that a lot from an economic development, a community development, accessibility is really an issue. And then I also do a lot, and this is where some of my original training as an urban planner comes in, if you will, is we do a lot of land use planning. And this is looking at, do we put compatible land uses around our airports? So you mentioned San Diego and coming in around with all the residential around it. That's the kind of thing that we're looking at of how can we make a more compatible, cohesive existence between what's already near an airport or not make it any worse. And especially if we've got airports that are looking to expand. So I get to dabble in a lot of different things. And then this is the last one, is I mentioned the national research. So I've been lucky enough to be involved with over 30 different projects over the past 20 years, looking at topics that are important to airports across the country, and how do you develop some national guidance on dealing with those different issues. And so it's been everything from wildlife hazards to how do you manage a small airport, to most recently I did a guidebook on aviation education, and how do we get the word out that there is more to aviation than just being a pilot, that there's this whole career path out there, and certainly not just airport planning, but every career imaginable you can, again, tie back to aviation generally. So like I said, I don't do the same thing twice in any given day, and it's a lot of fun to be able to have that flexibility.
Well, it's fascinating to hear all the different projects that you work on, Stephanie. I'm wondering if you could share with a young person who's watching this, and maybe urban planning is something new to them, and maybe they like planes and aviation too. What are some things they could be doing at the high school level to start to prepare themselves for a career, and specifically airport planning?
Probably just getting exposed to it, seeing if you have that passion. Most of my counterparts who do this, what makes me sad to some degree is there isn't a program out there. This isn't something where you say, well, if you decide, man, that sounds like a lot of fun, I'd like to be an airport planner. There's no a defined career path for that. There's no college in the country right now that offers a degree in airport planning. You might get a class. I teach one class right now at Western Michigan University, once a year. That's airport planning. So for 13 weeks, you're going to get immersed in it, and that's your taste. So I think it's some of those skill sets that I look for when I'm hiring somebody is, do they have good writing skills? Writing is key. You know, Copilot and Chat GPT are not going to know some of these nuances that we're looking for. So we're not looking for folks who can program that. We're looking for, can you actually write? Can you speak well? Having good interaction, because a lot of my daily basis is working with the communities, meeting with concerned property owners that are near an airport, saying, is the airport going to expand, or what are you doing? And I'm annoyed by this noise or that noise. And so you really have to, get some of those skill sets. Your typical technical with the science, math, also great resources for you, because there's a lot of technical side of what we do. We're reviewing FAA data sources. We're running mathematical equations to figure out, what's the length of the runway and things like that. So all those kind of things all can be applicable. If you're not strong in the math and sciences, that's okay. There's a niche for you with that also within the planning. But if you are, we can put that to work as well. So, there isn't a bad career path, I think, if you were interested in airport planning. Every one of those different skill sets that you might develop are something that we certainly can use and build from.
Yeah, and you had given us some examples of some of the people that you've hired earlier, like the chemist.
Yep.
So interpersonal skills, writing, math and science, some technical, analytical brain. I mean, like you say, it's kind of a transferable thing.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful for young people to hear. Do you know anyone that does job shadows? Would you ever allow young people to come in and just see what your offices are like? Is it more really these kind of informational interviews like we're doing now to have a young person reach out to someone?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't do a lot of them, just because what we do on a day-to-day sitting here at my desk is kind of boring. But what we have done with a number of them is when we're doing community events. If we get somebody who reaches out and is interested in something, we usually try to hold on to their number and say, hey, well, we've got an upcoming public engagement event. Why don't you come and, shadow us on that, because that's a little more fun, in that you can see the whole dynamic of what's going on and how we interact with the public. So we've done that on several occasions. In fact, one of my most recent hires from Western Michigan came to us and did that. He contacted us while he was I think a sophomore at Western, and said, hey, I'm kind of interested in this. I saw you give the Western student presentation. Could I come and see what you do? And so it was while we were working on that Kalamazoo project. So he came to our public engagement meeting, took it all in, called me a few days later and said, this is really cool. Can I, what are you doing? And so we put together an internship, and he's now been employed with us as an actual employee for almost 2 years now. So yeah.
So young people, know what that young person did. They took the action step of networking and following up. So that young person took the initiative. So that's the key thing I wanted to point out right there. And that
absolutely.
Steffi, you were willing to put together an internship for someone that you could tell had some passion for the subject. So love how those kind of steps come together. With our final word of wisdom, is we're at that part of our time. It's been fascinating to learn about your work. What would you like to share as a final comment to young people who are exploring somewhere they like aviation, not sure what to do? What would you recommend?
Gosh, don't be afraid to reach out. One of the things that I love about this industry is that it's very cohesive and a pretty tight knit group of people. With this coming out of the Kent County ISD area, if you've got any interest, reach out to the Gerald Ford International Airport. I know a lot of the folks over there. They are wonderful people, and they are always willing to talk to somebody. There's a lot of opportunity with some of the other businesses that are there at the airport, not just the airport itself, but they're fixed-based operators, which are the businesses that operate there. Feel free to give me a call, Mead and Hunt. We're all interested, and I think that's applicable across the board. Talking about developing an internship, most of us as employers, if we find somebody that's got that interest, boy, we want to see it manifest itself in getting you into the pipeline. And so it's that little bit of excitement that we might see in your eye, or the development that we see that potential, we'd love to be able to build on that. So but we don't know it's there unless you make the phone call to us, or engage with us at a career expo or whatever it might be. But don't be afraid to show that initiative. Ask those questions.
That's some great mentor wisdom there, Stephanie. That's a great way to end. And Women in Aviation is the organization that I actually connected with you, and they have a career event. So young people, if you're watching this, look up, Google it, Women in Aviation. They have different events that you can meet some of these wonderful folks. Because I have heard from some of the other role models that is really great people in this industry. I have heard that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Women in Aviation. We have a Great Lakes chapter that serves the Grand Rapids, West Michigan area. And they've got a great career symposium, as well as Girls in Aviation Day are two of the events we do.
That's great. Thank you for making time to be with us today.
Thank you. It was great. Thanks so much. Good luck, everybody.